So, we have a number of things to dive into when it comes to the Detroit Red Wings, as earlier this morning, Steve Yzerman had his season-ending press conference and media availability with the media. He is here, so is Todd McLellan, and courtesy of Lucas Raymond the Goat on Reddit, there is a really nice, juicy write-up as to everything Stevie Y says and what needs to change for the Detroit Red Wings. Now, obviously, the video itself is 40-something minutes long, and the summary itself, it's pretty long too. So, let's dive into it. Let's not talk about everything. Let's just focus on some of the main points here. Lucas Raymond the Goat, they said that they type this stuff up regularly, so big shout out to you. You're a legend in the community. One of the main reporters, Helene St. James, asked, what would you change to get into the playoffs? Stevie said the players, goal scoring, and 5v5 in particular. Players need to play with the intensity of teams in the playoffs, and it's ultimately on him and his staff to get them there. Now, I think it's probably not a controversial thing to say that the majority of these Red Wings players, especially in the second half of the year post-Olympic break, were not playing with that playoff-like intensity. In fact, you can say a lot of these guys, especially in the bottom six, looked maybe checked out a little bit. They just weren't putting in effort. Not everybody can go out there with the might of 1,000 Emmett Finneys or whomever else you wanted to label as being an actual hard worker, because the rest of the gosh darn lineup, they weren't doing this, especially in the bottom six. Helene St. James said, it's been 7 years since Steve Yzerman was hired as the GM, and he was asked where he feels where they're at 7 years later. Steve said every year the expectation is playoffs, and he knew the task at hand 7 years ago. He can't pinpoint when they are going to be a playoff team, said there's a lot of things he is pleased about, but a lot of things he is not happy about. Everyone is emotional at the moment. Yeah, I think Red Wings fans have the right to be. They haven't made the playoffs in a gosh darn decade here, and the team had a chance to do it, but they blew it. Now Todd McLellan gets into the mix. He is asked by Helene St. James what was in his mind after the Florida Panthers loss. Todd said him and the players were embarrassed. The whole organization has to change. Also gave compliments to Florida, and that was an indictment on the Red Wings. So again, that embarrassing Red Wings loss versus the Florida Panthers, a team that quite frankly, you should be able to beat. And ultimately, they didn't get that done. 8-1, Wednesday, April 15th, and total embarrassment at the hands of the Florida Panthers. There is another question here from potentially Max Boltman, asking when Steve last spoke to Chris Illick. I spoke with him a few days ago. They're disappointed, continues to be supportive though, intends to have further conversations about teams and the future. There's another question here, this is interesting, asking Steve Yzerman whether or not he feels his job is in jeopardy. Steve said, well, I'm not just going to sit and hope for the best. I'm very disappointed with how it played out. 3/4 of the way through, they were pretty positive. He speaks with Chris throughout the whole season and says he intends to do the job to the best of his ability and see it through. Someone mentioned the jerseys comment towards Steve and mentioned the March collapse. Steve said everyone has to take responsibility, not just dump on the players. It's on the staff, the organization, and the players. You can't just sit there and say the players are no good. But he expects a lot more, even from players that had good seasons. Steve mentions he went through it as a player himself, and said you need to mentally get through the ups and downs, but it's on him and Todd to improve the talent and make them better. Now, I do think this argument needs to be brought up because a lot of people would say, hey, Steve Yzerman specifically, he was a really good player, and look at when he won his very first Stanley Cup. It took him years. Now, obviously, he's got 3, but Steve Yzerman played a good chunk of his Red Wings career before getting close to Lord Stanley's Grail. The guy was already a decade-plus long veteran in the NHL before he finally got that trophy. He got it multiple times, which is awesome, but a Dylan Larkin or a Sider or a Raymond if you really wanted to stretch it that way. Obviously, playoffs are the expectation, but as we are seeing, it's hard to make the playoffs. There is some commentary on Lucas Raymond's health, how Yzerman is refusing to say anything. Someone then asked if Steve could do anything with the roster philosophy that needs to change. Steve said definitely. Acquiring young prospects and draft picks is working, he said. As they're getting better, it's working. He says now the focus will be more on how he gets the lineup over the edge, but they need to score more 5v5, and that requires talent, and also be harder to play against. He says that's on the players to be harder to play against, and said if they can't do it, they have to bring guys in. He also calls out the bottom six in particular, checking line or shutdown line, said they need more goal scoring, but more shutdown as well from the bottom six. It's kind of funny because these comments, you wouldn't expect to say that for a team that was top 5 in the league and that was leading their division back in January, towards the end of January even. The Olympic break really did screw up with this team's mojo, and now comments like these, they have to be mentioned because they're true. It's kind of unfortunate that it fell this way, but I digress. Someone said, the way this season ended, did that affect your belief in this squad going forward? Yzerman said, in some players going forward, it reinforces what they believe in, but there is some growth that needs to be done. Said some of these failures are going to make younger players better if they're open-minded and have a growth mindset. You learn a lot in winning and in failure, but you can't just get rid of everyone. Said blunt conversations need to be had to challenge them and to be better. Ultimately, he said they need to be surrounded by more talent, but also need more from key players. Now, in regards to getting players, this is the next question over here. It's difficult to get an impact player in free agency. Does that mean he's going to go for a trade? He said he'll do whatever he can to take that next step. He did it with Justin Falk. With a 32-team league and the cap going up, free agency is thinner. Ultimately, you're drafting or trading to do that, which he is open to. Someone said, with the repetitive nature of what happens during their seasons, can he make changes in direction without a major shakeup, whether it be the roster or front office? He said everything needs to be assessed. It would be ignorant to not have an in-depth look at the team and the organization. Do we need major shakeups? Maybe, maybe not. He wants the players to take the next step and called out Bowman helping him and Draper to get through these things. He said the group needed to make changes and they got success. Someone blatantly said the front office again, any changes. He said this early right after the season ended, he'll talk and do whatever is right for the organization and he'll see it through. Someone then mentioned Dylan Larkin's goal scoring, but his lack on 5v5 play. Yzerman said 5v5 isn't just Larkin's issue. Kane, DeBrincat were the only 5v5 scoring they had. The rest of the lineup is an issue. Part of it is the way they play. They got to get to the net and take the puck there. He said going back to Larkin specifically, he provides a lot of things other than scoring, but he expects more from everyone. He also mentioned that he thinks Larkin being 30 is not a concern. The team needs to win. He doesn't know how to answer. He's optimistic about Brandstad Newgard, Plant, Bear, etc., and he said he's hopeful as early as next year they can take the next step. So there definitely is a lot to dive into here. You can read it yourself. I think we're kind of at the tail end of it, but the meat and potatoes about it is Steve Yzerman is really hammering down that this team did not live up to expectations and they need more, especially 5v5. From Helene St. James to Max Boltman, obviously they're getting their questions in, so that's always nice to see. But at the end of the day, Steve Yzerman's press conference is pretty revealing. Things are not done yet with the Detroit Red Wings, and I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about this brief summary over here? What are your thoughts on some of the comments that he had made about his team and their situation? What do you think needs to be improved, and who do you think should be on their way out? Yzerman calls out the bottom six. He talks about Dylan Larkin. He talks about some other stuff. Let me know in the comments all your opinions. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.